Hey, welcome back. So today we're looking at the story of Noah from a biblical vegan perspective. And really the easiest way to understand the story is to acknowledge what we read in the creation account, because it's really just a parallel of that story. We read about beginnings in Genesis 1 and then new beginnings in Genesis chapter 9. So just to begin, I'm going to run through one passage of text here. You all know it. It's Genesis 9 verses 1 through 4. Maybe I'll blow it up a little bit. It says, God blessed Noah and his sons and said to them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth. And the fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every fowl of the air and upon all that moves upon the earth, and upon the fishes of the sea. Into your hands they are delivered. And right there, he's reiterating the dominion that he has, that he was given in the garden. He's saying, look, again, you are going to be a steward over all of creation. You are a priest over what I have made, and a shepherd over the herds. You are to take care of them. People don't see that. I don't know why, but into your hands they are delivered. And now here's where he reiterates Genesis 1:29 and 30. He says, every moving thing, plants that lives, shall be meat for you, even as the green herb, just like I said in Genesis 1, just like I told you before, the green herbs, I have given you all things. But verse 4 says, the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, ye shall not eat. Now, what people like to do, they typically jump straight to Genesis 9:3 to prove biblical vegans wrong. And they, and I'll just say there are a few possibilities for interpretation. Okay, and maybe we'll look at some of those, but I believe the most consistent is that it depicts the Creator telling Noah the same thing he established in the beginning, according to Genesis 1:29 and 30. I have given you every green herb and fruit-bearing tree for food. Except here he takes it a step further, and he specifically forbids the killing and eating of flesh, anything that possesses blood life. And this is where a lot of people say, oh no, that's just a command to drain the blood first, it's convenient, but it's not consistent. Like I said in another video, if this is an example of the Father changing his mind about humans eating animals, then we have to understand that it would be his way of responding to fallen man who had already decided to do that. It's not what he created. It was never his will. He's not dealing with perfect man in our original divine state. So if this truly is a depiction of the Creator permitting mankind to eat the animals, then at most it can only be an example of concessionism operating according to the carnal lust of humans who had already violated the perfect order of design. Okay, so I'm going to scroll down to this the breakdown here, and just to show you that it works. The Hebrew works. The fear of you and the dread of you shall be upon every beast of the earth and upon every fowl of the air, upon all that moves, Ramas, R-A-M-A-S, not to be confused with Remes, R-E-M-E-S, and this refers to the creatures upon the earth, upon all the fishes of the sea, into your hands they are delivered. Okay? Every moving thing, Remes, R-E-M-E-S, Remes, however you want to pronounce it, the plants. So there's a distinction in the Hebrew from Ramas and Remes. Okay, one refers specifically and exclusively to the creatures of the earth, but this one has a little more wiggle room. It can refer to more than just animals. Okay, it can refer to the plants, and I believe that is why we see that distinction. Every plant that lives shall be meat for you, even as the green herb, I have given you all things, but flesh. Now, here's a word that specifically refers to flesh. It says, but flesh, basar, animal flesh, with the life thereof, which possesses blood, you shall not eat. Okay, it's abundantly clear, guys, that in verse 4, the verse that people want to overlook or explain away and say that no, it only refers to draining the blood first. And I don't eat blood. People will tell me, I'll say, what about verse 4? You're missing that. And they'll say, oh, well, I don't eat the blood, so I'm good. It's like you're totally missing it. And but so personally, I believe verse 4 makes it abundantly clear that we are not to eat flesh at all. And one thing, like I said, you saw the Hebrew breakdown, it differentiates between the possibilities, not just because the different words used, but because the flexibility of each one. The Hebrew just allows it to work the way I've just interpreted this. So just like the vegetation was provided for food during creation, the Father reiterated the same principle. It's as simple as that. Now, take a look at this here. Did you know, and some people know, every reptile which is living shall be meat for you. That's Genesis 9:3. That's how people, or how you will read the Genesis 9:3 in the Septuagint. It says reptile. So they've taken that Hebrew word and they've used it to refer to the reptiles. They've used it in an animal sense. Like I said, it has some wiggle room. It can refer to either. But I think the most consistent is plants because it is consistent with the creation account. Now, people who want to say Genesis 9:3 refers to God giving humans the green light on all animals, well, let's look at that verse in the Septuagint because it was translated as a reptile. And to my Torah brothers, well, you got a problem because it's referring to unclean animals. So what do? You're stuck, you're cornered, you're in a position where you have to either admit that the text has been manipulated to say something. You have to admit that there's a better way to translate it. That's the bottom line. You have to admit that you're dealing with a word that does have wiggle room, and in some cases, they just totally butchered it in the text. And I know some Torah friends who will admit this, and they'll say, well, the Septuagint is not the best translation of Genesis 9:3. Well, no kidding, because it's telling you to eat the snakes, and that doesn't make a lick of sense. Okay, so seeing the Septuagint rendering, it is so ironic because anytime you talk about veganism being a biblical concept, people will automatically ask about the clean and unclean, the 7 pairs of clean animals on the ark. So I think this is really ironic that people will talk about that, but then, hey, have you checked the Septuagint? Because apparently we're supposed to eat the reptiles now. And it just totally goes against Hebrew roots theology, Mosaic law, which is supposedly the highest moral standard. According to Hebrew roots theology, according to the Pharisees and Sadducees, what we read in Leviticus 11 is supposedly the highest moral standard. So going by that mentality, how do you deal with this? Let's keep going. Like I said, people bring up the pairs of clean and unclean animals that were appointed on the ark. 7 pairs of clean and 1 pair of unclean. So naturally, people think this proves that it was all for Noah and his family to eat during their time on the ark, right? I mean, why else? You know, it's that mentality, it's that conditioning, that indoctrination that has made people jump to that conclusion automatically. That's their first instinctive thought, is to say, oh, 7 pairs of clean animals. It was for Noah to eat. Okay. But the text says nothing about having an abundance of animals for food supply. At the most, we could only speculate that it was to feed the carnivorous animals that were aboard the ark, the animals who had defied their natural order and had rebelled against the Creator's design. Okay, so we're, like I said, if you read this verse and you see, it actually gives a reason why 7 pairs were chosen. It says here, oh, well, it was to keep their offspring alive on the face of the earth. So he chose 7 pairs to keep the offspring alive on the face of the earth. It's as simple as that. Who knows? Maybe the Creator understood that those animals were more important to have an abundant supply to fill the earth in larger quantities, especially knowing that they were the targets for carnivores. So for whatever agricultural reasons the Father might have foreseen, it could have been anything. I would imagine that he knew what he was doing if he wanted 7 pairs of clean animals aboard. It didn't have to be for Noah to eat. And after all, nobody seems to consider that the demand for plant-based options would have been much higher than carnivore options during the time on the ark. Okay, herbivores, they make up the majority of the animal kingdom. And I talked about this in my Mythbuster video the other day about, have you seen all the animals that are herbivores? Elephants, rhinoceros, gorillas. I listed off a ton of animals that were bigger and stronger than your average animal. Okay, and they're all herbivores, right? And so with so many herbivores on the ark, it would have required a stockpile of grains, nuts, seeds, fruits, vegetables, all of these plant-based foods to be stored. And a lot of these foods naturally have a long shelf life, especially the grains and nuts. The fruit would have lasted much longer back then too. In a pre-flood world or during that transition time, a lot of people talk about the atmosphere and how things kept longer. And it's possible that they even prepared a variety of dried fruits that would have kept for a longer period of time. Okay? So there were many mouths to feed that required a large supply of plant-based food options. But for some reason, people seem to neglect the more practical possibilities like grains. They want to jump straight to 7 pairs of clean animals. That was for everybody to eat. No, you've been indoctrinated. Since most people today, they're used to a diet revolving around animal meat. It's a lot easier to approach the story with that narrow mindset when that's all you're familiar with. So in other words, their only focus is to equate 7 pairs of animals with Noah eating them. It's just what happens when you approach the story with 1, a modern Western diet, and 2, a modern Western religious paradigm. That's just what happens. But when we slow down and we consider the story of Noah in the context of creation, we can understand that the Creator provided plant-based options for their survival. And even if Noah understood the difference between clean and unclean, it doesn't mean the Creator intended for mankind to consume animals. That's why it was one of the first things the Father addressed when Noah departed the ark. That's why he said in verse 4, but the flesh with the life thereof, which is the blood thereof, shall you not eat. Okay? Look at these little bullet points I have. It's commonly argued that blood draining is a fail-safe precautionary measure. People look at this verse, they say, it's just about draining the blood. Maybe I'll make it a little bigger. They say, but I don't eat the blood. The blood gets drained first. The blood gets, or here's one, the blood gets cooked out. So yeah, people, they think it prevents the individual from consuming any blood when eating meat. And others who can admit that blood draining can't remove every single drop, they say that, or they believe that any remaining blood cooks out. But that's just a myth, guys. First of all, there is absolutely no possible way to remove every single drop and blood cell from the body of a carcass. It's just impossible. And the concept of cooking the rest out is just a lie. Any remaining blood that is in flesh, it cooks into the flesh, guys. It's no different than marinades and meat rubs. There are people there who literally believe it's a magical process and that when you cook something, it just vanishes into thin air for some reason. All while they'll pat this chub of meat with meat rubs or marinate it, knowing that it'll cook into the meat. So it's just the mindset is contrary. Here's what's happening, guys. People who believe they're safe from consuming blood, they're just mistaken. They still consume blood. The only difference is that they consume cooked blood. And to say that blood can cook out of meat, that's no more logical than believing your marinades are cooking out or your rubs are cooking out of the meat. So people who eat animal tissue are consuming blood one way or another, which is a violation of Torah. Of course, they don't look at it that way because they have painted this sugar-coated paradigm according to all of these man-made laws that they read about in Leviticus. And naturally, most people, they play that ignorance card when it comes to the blood, or they convince themselves that it's not really as morbid as it really is. And for people who are willing to admit that blood cooks into the meat, they'll contend that, well, at least they're willing. That's a good thing. At least some people are willing to admit that it does cook into the meat and not out. But these people also think, well, it's not as bad. It's not the same as eating raw blood. And I agree, but I don't believe that cooked blood has the same effects as drinking living blood cells. But either way, it's still blood. It's still a dead animal. And it's still a violation of design. So aside from what a person considers kosher, the fact is that consuming animal tissue allows animal DNA, blood, and the DNA from its muscle tissue to pass through your body, whether it's blood, fat, flesh, or any other part of that animal. You are still absorbing that animal DNA into your body. Okay, let's change gears here. Noah was perfect in all of his generations, okay? Let me go back. See the full screen here. Verse 9-6. Noah was perfect in all his generations. People think that just because Noah is depicted as righteous, that it validates animal sacrifice. They think since God used him to save the human race, that his sacrifice pleased the Father. Because he sacrificed. But honestly, it doesn't really prove anything. It just demonstrates that Noah existed in a culture where people were already sacrificing to demons as God. Like it says in Enoch 19, or Enoch 9, verse 1. I can't remember which chapter. Noah just happened to be the person that was pulled out from his circumstances to do a task for the Creator. And a lot of it has to do with his bloodline. He had a pure bloodline that went back to the garden. And that's how God chose a lot of these people in time. How were their blood and needed to be preserved so that he could raise up the Messiah in future generations, because the Messiah had to come from a bloodline that was perfect, that could be traced all the way back to the garden where humankind was perfect. Because if any of it got mixed with the supernatural DNA floating around, you guys know the story, the Watchers, and if you know that all of mankind was corrupted in that way, then you'll know why God was preserving a bloodline for the Messiah. Okay? Anyway, that's another lesson. But people think if Noah sacrificed to the Creator, it was simply because he had retained, that people think that it's something that God asked him to do or required. But what I'm saying is that it was something that he had just retained from his carnal form of worship from the surrounding nations. Okay? It's no different than it is today, where religious communities who claim to follow the Bible, they allow the culture to influence their religious service to the Most High. This is why every church has Christmas gatherings with roasted ham as the main course. I mean, people, they know this. People are willing to admit that religious establishments are built on and they incorporate many pagan customs. And people know this happens today, but for some reason they look back at Noah or Abraham and they say, well, it couldn't have happened to these men. They were perfect and righteous. They were set apart all the way. They had absolutely no influence from the world. No, well, I think it's just like it is today. There are righteous people today. There are people who are perfect according to character. They are upright. They are these same words that you see in the Bible: perfect, upright, righteous. There are people like that today who are just in a situation or their circumstances. They have adopted a lot of pagan customs in their upbringing or whatever. Their religious paradigm is just shaped or centered around a lot of paganism. Okay? What people do has nothing to do with their heart. They're righteous. They can be doing a form of worship to God, not knowing that it's pagan. That's why it's in the church so much today. It's even in Hebrew root circles, Torah circles. You got a lot of paganism going on. You think the feasts that you celebrate today are exactly the way that God had intended? I doubt it. As a matter of fact, I know they're not. It doesn't matter. You can't get away from it. The Israelites, the people in the church, it's everywhere. You can't get away from the pagan customs of the world and say that you are completely set apart. We try to. That's the point. We try to. But like I said, it's why you see it even in the church. It's why even in the Torah communities, they center their feasts around whatever dead animals they choose to celebrate with. So our modern sacrifices are no different than Noah's sacrifice. We think that we're pleasing the Father by doing this. We put all the pictures of our tables set up for this feast or that feast, and there's a big dead animal in the center of your table. And that's not the way God wants it to be. He doesn't want you to eat that animal. He created it to be your buddy, not dinner. Okay? That is your fellow creature, as the Messiah taught. All right? So people who want to look at Noah and say, oh, his sacrifice is what God asked for, it isn't. It never was. So, we think that we are pleasing the Father, and so did Noah. Okay? But the truth is that we all have we've allowed the nations to determine how we celebrate our festivals, okay? And when it comes to Noah's sacrifice, the way I understand it is exactly the opposite of how it's understood in mainstream circles today, that the church, Christian or Hebrew roots, and people understand this. Let's read it. Let's just read it real quick. Noah built an altar to the Lord. He took of every clean beast, of every clean fowl, and offered a burnt offering on the altar. And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. Well, that response is interesting, and I'll explain why here in just a minute. It's not God saying, ooh, I love this. You see the writer there says it was a sweet savor to the Father. But the Father doesn't respond in that way. He doesn't say, oh, thank you for killing these animals and burning them up. No. He says, well, I won't curse the ground anymore for man's sake, but the imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. And I will neither again smite any more every living thing as I've done before. That's an interesting response to something that Noah thought was a good form of worship. And I'll tell you why. It's not an example of the Creator endorsing Noah's sacrifice. It's an example of the Creator rejecting it. And I discussed this in another video, God is Vegan, the bloody barbecue video. And that's where I talk about the phrase sweet smelling aroma. Basically, if you understand that the phrase pleasing aroma is something written from the writer's perspective, or the person telling the story who had that mentality, he was confused about it too, just as much as Noah was. These people, they have these carnal senses. They understand that, hey, it smells good. And I'm willing to admit it. I think barbecue smells good, but it's a human pleasure. It's a human sense that is aroused by the smell of something, even though it's a dead animal. It's God's creation suffering and burning on the altar, not something God wanting. So the writer thought that God liked it because they liked it. Well, if we like it, the creator must like it too. So it's a sweet savor to him. And it's just because they were indoctrinated from the nations. They were conditioned to believe the gods love this stuff. And so it was no different when they started doing it to the true creator. They had retained this paganism, thinking the true God loves the sweet savor in the same way the false gods love it. They had already adopted that mindset. Everyone just thought the gods loved it. So when you see the phrase, it was a sweet smelling savor, it's not unusual, or it certainly doesn't prove that the true creator loves the smell of you destroying what he has created. I'll tell you that much. It is the writer or the person doing it who assumes that the creator succumbs to the same carnal pleasures as humans or these other gods who want it. Okay? So now that I got that out of the way, the sweet smelling savor, and I'll tell you now, there is no place in the Bible where it depicts the Father, the Creator, saying that it is a sweet smelling savor. Every occasion of this phrase, sweet smelling savor, is written from the writer's perspective. There are no places where, like, you know how the prophets speak on behalf of the Father, and it's the Father's words coming through the prophet, where it says, thus saith the Lord, la, 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 and what they say is equivalent to what the Father said. There are no places in Scripture where it does that. So the Father never says in Scripture, he never says that these burning animals on the altar is a sweet smelling savor. And you have to understand that. You have to get that in your spirit, in your mind. You can't use that. You can't use the opinion of man and say it's God's opinion. Okay? I don't care how inspired you think that phrase is. It's no more inspired than Pastor Joe over here having his own opinion about something when he's been misled. Okay? It's no different. Anyway, if you can understand that phrase, sweet smelling aroma, is from the writer's perspective, then you can understand what else is happening in the story of Noah's sacrifice. The context, it's centered around the destruction of the earth due to the evil intentions of mankind. So when the Father was responding to Noah, it was not in a positive sense. It was in the same attitude that he was addressing the rest of the evil that he tried eliminating. You see how I showed you over here? Hey, look, Noah, I'm presenting a sweet smelling savor to the Lord. But the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground anymore for man's sake. What does that sound like? It sounds like his response to Adam when he sinned. He said, okay, you sinned. I'm going to curse the ground. So here, Noah sins, kills an animal and presents it to the Lord. God says, well, this time I'm not going to curse the ground. But the imagination of man is still evil from his youth. He's responding in the same way, but he's not going to do what he did to Adam. He had already done it. He had already cursed the ground because of Adam. And so when the Father is responding to this sacrifice, this occult blood ritual that Noah had adopted from the nations, God is saying, well, I can't curse the ground again. I already did that once. He's saying the imagination of man's heart is evil. And I can't smite the living things anymore because I already cursed the animal. you see, do you guys see what's going on? He's responding in a different way. He was addressing the rest of the evil that he tried eliminating. The imagination of man's heart is evil from his youth. So he's pointing to the disobedience of mankind. So the entire narrative of the flood is centered around evil, not good. And even though most people interpret the father's response to Noah here, it's as if he was saying, oh, good, you killed an animal in my honor. Actually, no, he was saying, oh, not again. And that's how you should read the text, because Genesis 8 through chapter 9, it is a parallel of the creation account if you know how to read the text. If you can put the proper context, if you can read it in the proper context of creation, then you should be able to see what's really going on. People don't want to do that. People want to jump straight to the law of Moses and say, that's the basis of our context. That's the foundation. So we interpret the rest of the scripture in view of the commands given to Moses at Sinai. That's not the way to do it, guys. There's a higher moral standard. It's not the law of Moses. Anyway, the evil inclination, what he's talking about up here, this evil inclination can be compared to the response given to Adam and Eve after their disobedience. We all know the story, guys. Man sinned. God cursed the ground. Adam disobeyed. The Father taught him a lesson. All right? The consequences were a direct result of acting on instinct and satisfying his senses. And it was the same behavior that Noah was reprimanded for. He acted according to his own sensual pleasure. And the Father responded. But instead of cursing the ground again, he said, well, I will not curse the ground for man's sake, but your imagination is still evil. Anyway, the story of Adam and Eve, it reveals the beginnings of humanity and how God dealt with their disobedience. And if you can understand that Noah's story reveals new beginnings, then you can see how it fits, how it is a parallel, and how God dealt with Noah's disobedience, okay? So in the story of Noah, the father, he was not pleased with his sacrifice. He was displeased, guys. The problem is that the way it is written into the text, it leads so many people to believe Noah's sacrifice was an act of good. And by factoring in the author's perspective and the use of words that we see, the translation process, the transmission, the timeline of 1,000 years, in which I call the game of telephone factor. Finally, our preconceived notions today that are influenced by our Western lifestyles and religion and culture. It's no wonder that people look at this story as a promotion for killing the Father's creation, saying he wants it. Okay? But what people overlook is just something that completely solidifies a compassionate vegan interpretation of the story, and that is the covenant that God made with man, with not just mankind, but with the animals. Let's look at this. Maybe I'll shrink it down a little bit so we can get the whole thing in here. Maybe not. I don't want it to be too small for you guys, but all of the creatures in the animal kingdom. Let me read this to you. It says, God spoke to Noah and his sons with him, and he said, behold, I establish my covenant with you and with your seed after you, and who else? And with every living creature that is with you, the fowl, the cattle, the beasts of the earth, from all that go out of the ark to every beast of the earth. And I will establish my covenant with you. Neither shall all flesh be cut off any more by the waters of the flood. Neither shall there any more be a flood to destroy the earth. And God said, this is the token of the covenant which I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you for perpetual generations. And I think that's interesting because people in Torah always look at this word perpetual when they see the law of Moses. And they'll say, look, everything that God gave Moses is for all generations, is perpetual. Well, jump back here, guys. Let's look at the covenant that he made with animals. Should we think this covenant was just the Creator's way of saying, okay, the reason I made you all was, the reason you were created was to be killed and eaten by humans. That's my covenant. No way. He's reiterating again the same thing he established in the Garden of Eden during creation. Everything in Genesis 9 is a parallel of Genesis 1. He starts over and he says, okay, let's try again. Everything I established from the beginning, it still stands. Eat the plants, don't kill the animals. It's that simple. And everything we talked about in the Gospel Complex series, it's exactly what we see here. Yeshua, he came and he reiterated the creation account. And he taught everyone exactly what the Creator intended from the beginning. And if you remember, he talked about all creatures of God so many times throughout the Gospel of the Holy 12. He even brought up the story of Noah to support his teachings. He told his hearers that the story of Noah is just a reiteration of the creation account. So it's really that simple. Our Creator had a plan in the beginning, and when he started over with a new, fresh slate, he laid down the same Torah instructions as before. So really, it's that simple. Do you guys really think this covenant that God made with the animals was just his way of saying, all right, I have preserved you just so we can kill you at our leisure. If we're hungry, we can kill you. That's my covenant with you animals. It's just to kill you. Guys, this goes back to using your conscience, using what God has given you to analyze and think logically. And people are afraid to do this. People are putting ink on paper above their ability to think. They don't want to think. They don't want to use their conscience because what they believe their authority says. They believe the Bible and what has been, I'm talking about what has been edited, revised, the transmission process, different government and religious leaders and their political and religious agendas. So they produced this Bible that we have today. It's gone through so much corruption over the past 2,000 years. The scrolls of the Old Testament dating way beyond that prior. And people are so naive to think that nothing has ever been tainted or affected, or they don't believe there were any religious agendas at hand, at stake. They don't think there's any political agendas. They don't think the scribes were evil. They don't believe the scribes had turned the law into a lie. They don't believe the prophets. It's a wonder that these people don't just take those books of the prophets and rip them out and throw them away because they listened to nothing that they said. The prophets were there to tell humanity, the Israelites, that God never wanted any of this sacrificial behavior. He never wanted them to kill the animals. So I don't know why people keep the prophets in their Bible if they think the law of Moses is their final authority. That's what I'd do. If I thought the law of Moses was my final authority, I'd just rip out the prophets and, because why even listen to them? They're saying the exact opposite of what Moses allowed. Yeshua, he was saying the exact opposite of what Moses allowed. He was saying Moses allowed this, but since the beginning, the Father wanted it this way. Your Creator made it a different way. He never wanted you to kill animals, okay? But really, guys, it's that simple. Keeping the higher standard, the same Torah instructions at the beginning that were given in the garden. This is the story of Noah in a nutshell. And if you want to, I don't know, I went into a little greater depth in the book. If you want to grab the book, and Shifting the Torah Paradigm, chapter 4, the story of Noah. So if you want to grab a copy of the book, there's a button on the homepage of my YouTube. Guys, this is it. From a vegan perspective, looking at the story of Noah, it's beautiful if you can read it in the context of creation. because it is a reflection of that same creation account. Okay. That's really all I have for today. Maybe there is one more thing I wanted to share with you. I might bring it up. Let me scroll down here on my notes. I don't know if it's going to, if you guys will see this. It's a meme I saw. Look at this. I see this floating around the Torah community all the time, or a version like it. It says, did God really mean don't eat it? Genesis 3:3. Did God really mean don't eat it? Leviticus 11:7. So what people are doing is they are equating eating pork with the original sin of eating the apple. And you guys, I think some of you know where I'm going with this, what I'm going to say. People in Torah are even more contrary than our Christian friends. You know, they have enough insight to say when God means don't eat something, don't eat it. But they will totally overlook the fact that God said don't eat the animals. Don't kill anything with flesh. Don't kill anything with blood life in it. Don't take the breath away from something that I have breathed life into. Genesis 1:29 and 30, guys. I gave you guys something to eat. Fruit, plants, the green herbs. And so when I see memes like that, and it just makes me realize how ignorant people are, or at least how indoctrinated they are, to think that God created the animals to eat. Well, not all animals, but half of them, the clean ones. Guys, it doesn't make sense. It's like if people can see that God does not want you to eat some animals, if you can see that some animals shouldn't be called food, then can you just use that same logic and look at the other animals that way? What's so hard about it? You have a partial revelation that, hey, a pig isn't food. Yet you've been duped and you've bought into the lie of the nations that, well, the cow is beef, but the pig isn't pork. Guys, come on. That's all I want to leave you guys with. I would encourage you guys to just keep going. Keep searching this out. If there's any topic that you want me to address, this one was something that someone had asked for. So I wanted to do a video on Noah today, and I really hope it helps. There might be a little more information in the chapter that I wrote about. It's a different approach to the story, but it covers most of what I talked about today. It's a little more wordy, but there it is, guys. I hope you liked it. Please give it a like. Share the video. If you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do so. I'm wanting to grow it now. Not sure how the best way to grow a YouTube channel is other than just share it. So if you guys can share these with everyone, that goes a long way. I've gained about 50 subscribers since I started making these videos. So I think that's the best way. So please do that. And I'll talk to you next time.